Yesterday, I was talking with a new acquaintance of mine, and we were talking about the games that he was interested in. And we were talking eventually about the ideas in pay to win. And I'm against it. I'm against it at in a level that I'm hoping I can articulate here. And so is he, but he had a different take on things. So the idea of pay to win for most people is real money goes in, winning comes out. Winning being defined as a comparison to the challenges set forth in a game. But because a player is not exactly competing with, but they are playing with other people, pay to win isn't in itself necessarily the problem that players have. It's in comparing themselves to others. And my knee-jerk reaction was to say that it's jealousy. And I was very quickly, not exactly corrected, but I knew that it wasn't quite the right word. I didn't have a really quick one-word way of explaining what was on my mind. And so we got to talking about more on that topic. And specifically, it wasn't exactly jealousy. It's something like when one player succeeds, it's almost like they succeed on their merit. And when they put money in, they're bypassing the challenges in the game itself. They're kind of like not playing the game, they're getting ahead. And you might think it's kind of a jealousy that person is kind of cheating. They're not putting in the effort to overcome the game to get from a starting position to, let's say, an end game type of position. Let's say early end game, whatever that means for a game. And his position was that there is, we ended up discovering that we were kind of talking about the same thing. Like we both had problems with it, but he had a different idea in mind for what it meant to have pay to win at different stages of gameplay. And he ended up describing something called pay to progress. And there's a difference between paying to win and paying to progress. They're both, I think, ethically, let's say, ambiguous. That there is something wrong about it. And there's something wrong about it in that it's shortening gameplay, and that there is kind of a meritocratic sense of not exactly competition, but there is a playing field that all players have that they see it as unfair when somebody else kind of leapfrogs without having to do the actual hard work in the game of playing the game. And that there's an ethics there, there's a morality there's something there, and we don't quite have the words for it. But he was articulating an endgame version of it that said, pay to win only exists between beginning and end game. But at end game, it becomes something else. Where it's pay to progress between starting and getting, there's no end. The entire point of a games as a service type of thing is that there is no end, that your wallet is captured forever, that you play, that you're on the hamster wheel and you just keep going. That's the hope, that's the dream. And they bring out new content or they do whatever, but you as a player would be captured in the game. You would enjoy yourself for forever. And paying to progress is kind of like paying to win. It's paying to bypass hard work. And it's wrong. It's wrong for those reasons. It's not exactly a jealousy thing, but it's kind of a jealousy thing when things are hard. But at endgame, pay to win doesn't mean the same thing. So There are games where when you're already at the end, putting more money in doesn't make you win. It doesn't really do anything. It ends up being more about aesthetics, more about being convenience. And there is no real separation between classes of player when a game is balanced well at the end game, because you can't pay to get more end. You can't get more. There might be expansions that are locked behind money, but that's accessible to everybody. Sometimes there's bits and pieces in some games, kind of like a DLC, but it's a content DLC, and that's something else that we hadn't discussed. That's pretty unethical to charge for. It's like you buy into a game, you get a certain amount of a game. Eventually, the game will be finished a year later after you buy the game and play it for a while. And then new content patches come out, but it's in trickles and bits and pieces that you have to pay for, as though you didn't buy the whole game up front in the first place. That's what it feels like for a lot of people to pay. So he was talking about the difference between pay to progress being unethical in that sense, but there being something like paying at endgame. And paying to play at endgame doesn't give the same kinds of rewards. You can't offer the same kinds of experience boosting. So, for example, in World of Warcraft, you can pay to progress by paying money to take a character from start and just bypass all content up to a certain level. Like, you can go back and you can play that content. It will be inappropriate for your level, but you can go and experience that stuff if you really want to. But you kind of start off at the end of the last expansion. You just hop into what the current material is as a reasonably new character, and you can play this expansion. So you've progressed through however many expansions, 110 levels of stuff. You can just start now. And so that's pay to progress. And that is kind of wrong, and it's kind of cheating. And yet too many of these games are about end game anyway. So really what that person has done is they've paid to bypass the nonsense of the non-game to get to the game that they actually want. So they're kind of like paying double for the game just to actually start the game off at the end. But once they get there, putting more money in doesn't do anything. And he was making an interesting argument to me. Like I said, we were kind of antagonistic about understanding what was going on until we reached this final bit. We were talking about kind of the same thing, but he had another idea. He was saying that once people reach endgame, it's not just that they can't put more money in. They can maybe, but it doesn't really progress more, doesn't really win more. Because at the end game, it's playing, it's about effort, it's about the meritocratic comparison between players. And he was saying that at the end game, every bit of money that a person has put in to progress means nothing. That him as a player who has earned getting from beginning to there and not paid, they earned in the sense of they haven't paid, like he hasn't paid money, like real world money to get to where he is, versus him playing with a friend who has paid money, that he actually feels sorry for them having wasted that money. It's a rather interesting perspective to think that somebody who has spent money to bypass all that content will be in the same place as everybody else and will have essentially wasted all of that money for nothing to get there. And it's not entirely true, because they've paid to get to the real part of the game. And yet the kind of ethical, I lack the words, the kind of mood, the feeling that players might have in terms of when they are leveling, comparing themselves to somebody else who's leveling, who's paying money to do it faster. There's something there, and that becomes different at endgame. That becomes different at endgame, and he was saying how he kind of feels sorry for those people having done that. And I know there's a lot of weird pay-to-win evangelism or apologetics that talks about how, I mean, you've got to support the game, servers are expensive, development's expensive, and all kinds of reasons. And there's validity, there's enough that, but too many games pursue that, and too hard and in the wrong way, and in too visible way, that they kind of force players to look at one another and judge one another based on how much money they've spent. And when things are visible like that, and they're too visible, and they are about power in the game, they're about ability in the game, and not just cosmetics, then it becomes kind of a problem. And there is apologetics about, let's say you've got two people, they're both playing the game. One person has paid to get advancement, and the other person hasn't. Well, the perspectives are a little bit different. The perspective of the one person who hasn't paid anything is that other person hasn't done the work in the game. I've played the authentic game. I've earned what I have, which is true. And the apologetics, not necessarily held by the person who plays, but certainly by evangelists of the company or the model for pay to win, they'll say, but that other person has also worked for it. They worked in the real world for real money that they've also used arguably more effort, more time than the player who's only put in those hours in the actual game. And that doesn't sit very well. That sounds like a really dirty angle to get away with doing bad things. And I don't like that perspective. But thinking of it in terms of the end game characters and end game players, and ending up feeling bad for somebody else having missed out on content, for having achieved by doing things the hard way, by doing things the right way. It's a very interesting perspective for me to have thought about. So hopefully you'll think about it as well.